Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Black Girl Ambition with me, Naya Baxter. This is your go-to space for community empowerment and practical tips to help you level up in your career and in all aspects of your life. Here, we have real conversations about navigating corporate careers, about entrepreneurship, wellness, and Black womanhood. I like to describe Black Girl Ambition as equal parts executive level coffee chat meets sister circle meets motivational masterclass. Black Girl Ambition is not just a podcast, it is a community and a movement. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite streaming platform. And if you love the mission and the message, you know what to do. Please rate, please review, please subscribe, and also share with a friend or another friend if you haven't already. Ambitious Black girls. Today, we are speaking with Theresa Wilson, Esquire, a lawyer, a TEDx speaker, and a nationally respected race teacher whose work sits at the intersection of law and equity and human dignity. Theresa recently gave a powerful TEDx talk that I would encourage you all to go and listen to. It's called Know Your Place. And in this TED talk, she introduces the concept of place consciousness, a framework that challenges us to examine how history and power and identity and fear are shaped by the seats that we occupy in society and how often systems are designed to keep people exactly where they are intended to be. By training, Theresa is an attorney who has worked both as a prosecutor and a public defender. She's also an educator. She is a truth teller, and she helps institutions and leaders and everyday people understand how bias becomes codified into laws and policies and professional norms, and how fear actually masquerades as neutrality and keeps us all living in the status quo. Theresa's work is not just theoretical, it is also lived experience, and she brings the weight of that experience as a Black woman and as a mother and a daughter and a parent into how she teaches and she writes and she speaks. Today's conversation will help provide some language and some clarity and also affirmation for people who are navigating today's social, legal, and professional landscapes. And I am very excited to go deep today and to get into it. Theresa, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. Theresa, I love to start these conversations understanding a little bit more about who you are, the experiences that shaped you, especially early life, even childhood experiences. My first question for you is around growing up. What were some of the earliest messages that you recall receiving, whether those messages were spoken or unspoken, about where you might belong and was considered safe to you, how visible you were allowed to be?
So I grew up in a community that was pretty diverse. It was about 33% of everything, 33% Latin, 33% Black, 33% white. And at the time, in growing up there, we kind of felt like we lived in an environment where we didn't recognize the inequalities that were happening, even though they were blatantly in our face. First, the white people who lived in our community were economically disadvantaged, right? The Black people were the economically advantaged individuals in the community, because white people, I grew up in Long Island. White people who had money did not want to live in communities where there were Black people. So some of the messages that I received in growing up were, you're not going to make it, you're not good enough, you're not going to be able to do this. I remember my mother was a high school guidance counselor, and I had a high school teacher. I wanted to be a lawyer from a very young age. It's probably about 12 when I shadowed one of the local attorneys. In fact, one of the only local attorneys who was a white man. I shadowed him and went with him to court, got to see a judge, talking to this kid in court. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to help kids. I want to be able to do that in a way that is overwhelmingly inclusive of understanding of all the things that you need to do in order to be helpful to children. Knowing that I wanted to be an attorney, I started trying to figure out in high school what I needed to do in order to make that a reality. Mm-hmm. And I had a professor who was like, you're never going to be an attorney. You can't write. And those messages, who was a white man who was saying this to me. And actually, he said it to my mother. He went to my mother, who was a guidance counselor in the school, and said to her, Teresa's not going to be an attorney. She can't write. He was an English professor. And that is a message that followed me throughout my legal career. Anytime that, the idea of having to write something, which happens all the time, anytime I had to face that obstacle, I heard his messages in my mind, which is probably why I was determined to write as much as possible, right? So that's when I started publishing. So I was like, he is not going to take from me my capacity to be able to do something because he told me, 30 years ago that I wasn't going to be able to do it. I'm going to just keep doing it until somebody recognizes my excellence in doing it and I hear different messages so I can have a different tape playing in my head. It's kind of what I wanted to do. Early images were always about the inability of a little Black girl to be able to make her dreams come true.
And those messages were coming from the surrounding community, or were they coming from your family? Or was your family insulating you? What was the relationship to those messages?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family. My mother, educator, right? Guidance. My father was a police officer. My family came because they were public servants. A lot of what was happening in my family was kind of just work hard and stay hard, do your job, don't get in trouble, don't get out of line. You'll be the best thing that like America can be for Black people. In at least my father's head was like the public servant. And my father came from a pretty poor family. Mm-hmm. So he was very young when he had to start working and taking care and contributing to the family income. So the work ethic that he instilled in us is still my work ethic today, but it was definitely tainted with like a ceiling, a capacity. Sometimes his messages weren't you're not good enough, but maybe that seems really too hard. So maybe just do something that's less. My mother's messaging was very different. My mother was kind of like, oh, this is what that teacher said. So what are you going to do about it? How are you going to? But my mother also came from a family where her mother was an educator. So she came from a place where her family was economically sound. There were college graduates in her families in the 1920s and 1900s. So her frame and reference was very different. I got a little bit of both from my family. But one of the things that my parents made sure of is that we were engaged in community, that we contributed to community, and that we felt the love about community.
That is so interesting. And there's so much there. And it resonates a bit with my own story too. But how having like your mother having that legacy, right, of accomplishing more, raised the ceiling on what she saw possible for you, and how like the messages that were coming from your father, as well as the messages coming from that white teacher, were both rooted in fear in different ways. Mm-hmm. Your father's in the sense of like protection and I want the best life for you.
Yes.
And like my heart hurts whenever I hear those stories about some random adult telling some wide-eyed child what they can't do in this world. Oh my God. It's just like, what is wrong with you?
I don't know. I feel like we face that all the time. Like
it's wrong with you.
Yeah. It reminds me of that experiment, the doll test. Like I use that in my training sometimes, and people the first time they see it, they're so like, oh my God, I can't believe that's happening. And I'm like, literally that's happening for Black and brown kids all the time. We are constantly being little. And you see how like the littling becomes something that we adopt for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think definitely some of that was what was happening with my dad. The littling was something that he had adopted. So he found this one way to get through, economically, because he was a public servant. And then he ended up making enough money to be able to take care of his family and his whole extended family. Mm-hmm. So for him, that was the way out.
Yeah. Yeah, I do understand that. So how do you think those narratives, those competing narratives growing up shape the way that you approach ambition, even early on?
I think that there was always a sense of hesitance and fear underlying anything that I tried to accomplish, even though I had the fortitude to try to accomplish it. Right. So, and I don't think that that has changed for me, whether I'm applying for a job or doing a TED talk or whatever I'm doing. There's always this underlying fear. Is it going to be good enough? How much, what do I need to do? And I think for me, and this is probably true with lots of Black women, right? What happens is we try to compensate for me what is fear by doing all of the things. How many things can we do to make sure that we, like, my resume is ridiculous. It is ridiculous for me to look at it.
You all, her resume, opened it up to review it before this conversation. It's 7 pages. 7 full pages in Lolo font. I was scrolling and scrolling. I was like, how could she have possibly, when is there the time?
There isn't the time. So that's how we make ourselves ill, emotional baggage, because there isn't the time for all of it. But yet and still, you know, I was having a conversation with my sister yesterday. She was at home. She was getting ready to do one of her community organization meetings. She's the vice president of this organization. And she said, I wonder what other communities of women every day are going to meetings every day afterward, right? Like it never, we are constantly trying to fulfill our requirements that we have of ourselves to be better. So I don't remember the question, but that's the answer.
That's the answer. And I'm just sitting in the answer like, yeah, there's a lot. There's potential wrapped in it. There's trauma wrapped in it. There's expectation. There's imposter syndrome. There's like, like a stew.
Yep.
But
my mom is also in the back of my head, like pushing. And, you know, my mother was a person who probably why we engaged so much in the community, and also didn't necessarily let people's no's limit what she did. So that legacy follows me too, which is why whenever somebody says no, and I've had a lot of no's, like I continue to do the thing that I want to do.
That's a good transition to us talking about your recent TED Talk, I think about 3 months ago, called Know Your Place. Want to get into it a bit. You open it by recounting a story of sitting at the kitchen table with your sisters and your mom, and you are like watching the murder of George Floyd on television.
Yeah.
And then shortly after, you make a statement about how the ideology of knowing your place is as American as apple pie.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really hit by that statement, one, because it deeply resonated. But I would love for you to tell me more about why and how you decided on the topic of your TEDx talk and the message that you wanted it to convey.
Yeah, that was a journey, I will say. And it really is tied into the TEDx process. I'm going to talk about them kind of conjointly. When you are thinking about doing a TED, the one thing that you have to have is an idea. What is your idea? So mine was place consciousness, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But from the idea of place consciousness, my question to myself was, how am I going to tell this story? And I really wanted to tell the story of my cousin who was lynched. Right? That was the story that I wanted to tell. That is the reason I started thinking about even doing a TED Talk, because I had been trying to, you know, as a race trainer, I'm doing research around how to find the truth behind his story, and was having trouble. And I just wanted to get his story into the ether. So what ended up happening is you apply for TED Talks. And in the application process, the TED Talk that I ended up applying for, where I was successful, was a TED Talk for women. My cousin is a gay Black man, or was a gay Black man. So the reason I started the talk around the kitchen table and with a group of women is because that's like the central experience for Black women, you know, the kitchen table commonality, the kind of conversations that happen around it. Reminded me of kind of like, you know, getting a hair press in the kitchen and having those conversations, and like the generation that are sitting around the kitchen, whether we're doing Thanksgiving and, you know, you're trying to recreate your aunt's macaroni and cheese, or we're just having stories and conversations. And I remembered that day, mostly because it was the day that my dad died. but it was also the day after George Floyd died. And my sister, my younger sister, is a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
I was a public defender at the time and also kind of doing my race trainings. And then my older sister is a nurse. And what I remembered so vividly about that conversation was the way that each of us were approaching the video as we watched it, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were all kind of, as Black women, hurt by what we saw. But the hurt manifested itself in different ways. For my sister, like hers was the older sister. She was talking medically about whether he could breathe or what was happening to his body. For me, I was talking about the legalities of what was happening to him. And for my sister, who was the cop, she was talking about like the way that like what this cop was doing was going to impact the whole community, Black cops, like the rift that it was going to cause between our communities as Black people and the communities of the police officers who police Black communities is what they did. So that is why I started it at that point, because that conversation was so memorable to me for many different reasons, but it really tied into knowing your place, right? Because each of us were talking and looking at the same thing and having a different perspective based on our place.
Talk to me a little bit about place consciousness, because I loved learning more about that and listening to your talk.
Yeah. So place consciousness is interesting. It came to me from a bunch of trainings that I was doing in the legal profession. I was being trained by a doctor who was speaking about how young people are perceived by the police in the legal community. There's something in the law called the reasonable person, and the reasonable person is kind of like this main person, standard person by which everything is judged. But the reasonable person is infused with bias, because the reasonable person comes from like these laws that are made by the same person, who are white men in their, 40s and 50s. Like those are the people who make the laws about what the reasonable person is. So everything is judged by what the reasonable person would think, which is their reasonable person and not necessarily my reasonable person. But this doctor was talking about like the child being the reasonable person and what that would look like if they were involved with the police. So if a child is running from a police officer who grew up in a community where police officers were shooting their friends, is that reasonable for a Black kid to be running away? Whereas if we were using the reasonable person of a white 40-year-old, maybe it's not reasonable for the white 40-year-old to be scared. I took that learning and conversation and understanding that I got from that training. And then there is another doctor, his name is Dr. Ken Hardy. And he talks about how we can be privileged in certain ways and we can hold certain pieces of our identity that are not privileged. And it depends on where you're having the conversation. So say you and I were speaking to somebody who is non-native to America. And we're talking about immigration in today's
environment.
In today. So if we were having that conversation, we, even though we're Black women, we have the privilege of not being in a place. This is a hypothetical, y'all.
I'm like, well,
but
I think I know where you're going, and I think I know what they're trying to do. So keep going. I get what you're saying.
So yes, so maybe in that place we are privileged, where the person who is from the immigrant community is less privileged than we are. So his idea was, it depends on what conversation you're having. Like he would say, he as a Black man speaking to a white woman about something that is based on gender, he would be in a privileged position. If the two people were speaking about race, she would be in the privileged position. So it made me think, he teaches that like privilege shifts. And because privilege shifts based on what conversation you're having, and because the reasonable person is different based on your understanding of what reasonableness is, that is how place consciousness develops. It made me think that Really it's about what is your place and what is all of the background experiences, history, and societal issues that create the place that you have. It is going to determine how you see whatever it is that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind place consciousness is, yes, I need to be aware of my place because it will help me understand that no, that man is not telling me that I'm not going to be a lawyer and not going to be a good writer because that's true. He's telling me that because of my place. But it also is that other people need to be aware of the places that they're putting people in, because that man, that teacher, should be aware that he is telling me that not because of my own capacity or ability, but because of the manner in which society places people of color and lessens their capacity or ability.
Yeah.
There's a study. There were a set of teachers who were given information about these students, and some of them were told that these students
read this in your article,
and that the other students were going to do poorly. And students excelled who were expected to excel because the teachers poured into those students. So had that teacher poured into me instead of doubting me, maybe I could have been on the Harvard Law Review instead of the law journal that I got.
The way that you presented this idea of place consciousness was like being in a theater. I think like you go on Ticketmaster and then you purchase your tickets to the Cowboy Carter concert, and your ticket, maybe it's down in the orchestra area and you've got a really good unobstructed view, but then someone else is in the nosebleeds and they're behind a pillar. So maybe their view and they're not seeing everything. And I thought that was such a great way of presenting the idea, because we've all been in that experience of going to a show and we're at the same show and we're seeing the same thing, but we're seeing it in a different way because of our seat. And so I loved that analogy.
Ever since I used that analogy, like people keep giving me more depth to that analogy. Like somebody was like, what about the people who are like holding the little flashlights and telling you where to sit? That's bias. Those are those people like
telling you where to go. That's funny.
So I love that analogy.
When you talk about privilege is, so what you described, I describe as situational privilege. Like you have situational privilege based on your identities and even based on circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And you can move in and out of having privilege at any particular moment. So like, I agree. I am a Black woman. I'm also cisgender, heterosexual, and those born in America. And those things provide me some privilege over someone who is perhaps LGBTQIA or trans or disabled or an immigrant, not native born to America, as you had mentioned. But I find that the concept of privilege, people really struggle with, Theresa. They struggle and they have an immediate emotional reaction. It's like, objectively speaking, it's just how things are. It's just kind of an observation of how things are based on all the ways that we categorize people into little buckets. But having delivered in my profession dozens and dozens of trainings on race, I find that privilege is a topic that people really, really struggle with. And I'm curious, after you've delivered, I'm assuming like hundreds of trainings on bias and discrimination and colorblindness and meritocracy, what have you noticed a central theme around how people react to being made aware of their privilege or presented with this information? What's your takeaway?
Yeah. My takeaway is probably that we go to naming it too quickly in our trainings. And I think that there is a whole host of non-triggering language, because it's a trigger word, that we can use early in the trainings to get people to the place where they're talking to you about their privilege and you're not talking to them about it. I just feel like when there are triggering words, we can leave them alone because it's the concepts underneath it that matter anyway. And then I also feel like it takes a lot to get to the place where people are ready to talk about how they are showing up. And my trainings are all restorative justice based, right? So we are spending a ton of time building the community before we're talking about anything that is going to make somebody feel like they're not part of the community. All of those things to me are really important when you're giving trainings around bias. But it doesn't always work. All the layers that you put into place in order to make people feel whole and secure and safe in spaces to have hard conversations, it doesn't always work that people are willing or able to have those conversations regardless. And privilege is one of those words that just, if people are not ready, will immediately put blockages into somebody hearing what you're trying to convey, which is why I use place consciousness.
Right.
Because it's talking about the same thing. Right.
Well, so I was going to pose a question about what you do instead, or how you would present that topic instead. And place consciousness is how you present that, because you are talking about the underlying, like the same thing without using a trigger word.
Yes. And like you said, everybody has had the experience of going into a theater. So it resonates for people. The other thing that I tend to do is talk about my own privilege, that situational privilege that you're talking about, because I come from an economically advantaged family. Like, there are lots of privileges that I have, and then lots of privileges that I don't.
That you don't.
And I talk about them all because it builds community. And then somebody will stay in the conversation, which is the point.
That is a very practical and optimistic way to approach it. Because my answer to the same question of what have you observed after all the work would be like, y'all, we're cooked. We're cooked. I don't even know I'm not even going to hold you. We're cooked. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. I kind of agree that we are we're in a bad place. We're in a bad place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, when the Supreme Court tells us that we're allowed to stop people on the street based on the color of their skin, it is a bad place.
Mm-hmm.
That only impacts people who have colored skin.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, how could that be okay?
Bias codified into law. Yeah.
We've been here our whole lives.
Yeah. It's just sad because people like to believe that the myth of it all is that we've made way more progress than we actually have, and wish that we were honest about it.
Yeah, that's what the reasonable person is, right? The reasonable person is supposed to be our progress. But when you look underneath and you see what the reasonable person actually is talking about, it's using white heteronormative values to talk about what's reasonable and what isn't.
For everyone. Right.
For everybody.
Right. I want to get into a little bit more about your TEDx journey, because it seems intimidating. I'm curious how you identify the platform. Was it your idea to apply? How long was the process? What was the writing or rewriting kind of submission look like? How long from expressing interest to actually taking the stage? And just demystify that a little bit, because I would love more Black women with all of the intellectual property and dynamism that we have to take that stage more and to go after it. But I don't know that we see it as an option.
Yeah, I will say that I'm definitely still learning from my TEDx, because there are things that I wish I had done differently. So, and a lot of people ask this question. I probably will do a training on it because so many people have asked about how to do this. But so there are a trillion TEDx's that exist.
Okay.
In the world. First thing is to go online and figure out what platforms speak to who you are and speak to the message that you want to bring. Because they're only going to give you a spot when the two of those things match. Right? What their TEDx is about and what you want to bring to the conversation. So you have to do some research about all of the TEDx's that exist. And then you have to apply. Now, for me, I applied to a bunch of them, and I applied to a bunch of them in a specific order. There was one that I wanted to get in first. That was the first one that I applied to. It was the one that I felt like most comported with what I wanted to say. And I became a finalist in that process. And then I was bounced. That process and every TEDx process that I've been through in terms of my application have been different. Most don't necessarily require that you have your full TED written out, but they do require that you can speak about what the TED is going to be about, that it is an innovative idea. Mine is privilege, ultimately. But even if it's that, how do you couch it in a different way to appeal to a broader audience? After you figure out which of the platforms meet your needs best, apply to as many as possible, and then go through the process. Like everybody's process is different. So some people are going to have you doing interviews on multiple occasions. Some people are going to have you doing a sample of what you're going to do for a 2-minute time frame. Some people are going to have you come in and speak in person to them about what you want to do. Like I said earlier, I wanted to make my TEDx about my cousin. But when I joined a TED that was about women, I had to shift and figure out like, how is this going to be more about women than it is about my gay, whose story is also in there. Then there's a bunch of coaching, feedback, both before and after, writing and rewriting, and all of that depends on who you're with. We had coaches who were helping with the writing. We had coaches who were helping with the performance piece. We had some coaching around how to guide traffic after the TED is presented. One of the things that I wish I had done differently was name my TEDx something other than what it's named. I like the name. It talks about what it is, but you can't look at the name and know what it's about. And you have to be able to look at the name and know what it's about. So I should have said something like, know your place, a new perspective on DEI. So that people would look at it and know what it was about. And it would draw people to come watch it, because nobody knows that this is about DEI until they read the mini synopsis that's underneath it, or I send it to somebody. But it's always a constant learning process. Even how do you get on the podcast tours after you've done your TED, so you can, bring your TED to a broader audience? Or how do you use your TED in speaking engagements after the fact? So yes, I definitely feel like it's an accomplishment. And no, I don't feel like it's an accomplishment that any Black women can't do, because we are. Yes, we are. I just think it requires what we always do, which is persistence and hard work.
Will you do it again?
I would do it again. I would do it again, and I would tell a different story, but I think I might tell a story with my daughter. My daughter is selective mutism, and the journey of her evolution from childhood to adulthood is an interesting evolution. And I think I would want to have that story, which doesn't belong to me alone, told by both of us.
Very helpful to demystify that. Do you feel like having the platform has raised your credibility or had career benefits for you?
Seeing career benefits yet. I definitely feel like it has raised my credibility in the conversations that we have around DEI, because people look at TEDx as like an ultimate arrival at something. And for me, my authentic reason for doing it was because I wanted to get the story out. Yes, I expect that it will continue to help my career. I haven't really tried to leverage it, but the story is coming out. And place consciousness to me is a concept that can help bridge the gaps that are harming us as Americans, right? I feel like if the people on the Supreme Court thought about the place of the Black and brown people that they're now letting get stopped on the street because of their Black and brownness, maybe they'd make a different decision in their capacity as the ultimate deciders of what the law looks like in this land. So I just want people to be thoughtful about what their place is, so that it can build better places for us all. Actually,
build better places for us all. And that's really the goal. It's not to take anything away from anyone. It's to build a better place for all of us. That's a good segue to my next topic. We talked about fear and how that codifies itself into structures, into society. In your work as a prosecutor and an educator, you've made it clear that fear, it's not just some emotional thing, right? And it's not benign. It doesn't mean nothing. It gets codified into these laws and policies and professional norms. Is there a particular place where you see that most clearly when you look across different societal structures?
My main focus is in, before I answer that question, let me just start by saying somebody sent me something a couple of days ago about this woman who was a nurse in a NICU and breaking Black babies' bones. 9 Black babies have had their bones broken.
Yeah, by a NICU nurse.
By a NICU nurse. And the lady I was looking at her article was talking about like how flexible babies' bones are because they're just born. Yeah. So like the level of force that it takes to break them. And the woman's sentence was around 3 years for 9 babies' broken bones. Now, what that made me think is how we value people. So what comes to me when you ask me that question is about how we value people. I feel like who we most fear are Black men. You could be a Black man just like, I don't know, getting a coffee. And people are afraid of you because of who you are. Unconscionable that is the way that our brains work. But it is the way our brains work. And so we have to rewire our brains to think differently. But yes, I see it most for Black men. And I think that the fear that people are having right now around Black people, or like I will say like the fear that is causing where we are in our country to be where we are, is about people thinking, hoarding their own things, and thinking that if they can't keep what they have, if they have to share it with somebody else, or if somebody else is taking something that they want, they have less. When we live like in this society that has like so
more
much.
Than enough. There's
Right.
more than enough.
So much that we don't need to think in the scarcity mindset. But I think that is the fear that drives the scarcity mindset, is driving all of this behavior about like why we're talking about now how that white men are discriminated against. Yeah, so I definitely think that there's fear mostly around scarcity, but also like this unreasonable fear about how we feel about people who come from other cultures and tribes. And if we thought about it, it means that our primitive brain, our amygdala, is making all of those decisions for us, and we're not in control. So if we wanted to actually be in control of our own capacity to think for ourselves, we would do the work that is required to fix our amygdala and build new pathways in our mind, so we're not afraid of either like the scarcity by sharing something with the rest of the world, or Black men or Black women.
Yeah.
Or Black people.
Yeah. Yes.
Or little Black babies who get their bones broken.
It's like that amygdala, that primitive lizard brain, I think I've heard it called, that makes these sorts of like scarcity fear based. It runs so much of how people operate, society operates. When I hear racist things, it makes it said or done towards someone, it makes me upset. But I don't have respect for just low ideas. It's not expansive. There's no creativity. There's no strategy. There's no, like, it's just so primitive. And it's like, it's just dumb. It's just so dumb. I'm using all these words, and what I'm trying to say is it's just dumb. And if you want to be smart, then you would take a step back to think and not let your most primitive part of yourself run everything that you say and do and think.
Yeah. I remember when I first came to these trainings, and I don't know if this happened to you also, but when I first started doing them and I was looking for the answers like a good little legal researcher does, I'm like looking through the files, trying to find the answers. And the answers were like, slow down, think, stop, build relationships with people who are not like you. And I was like, this is some hokey nonsense.
You're like, what is this?
Actual answer.
Hilarious.
And then I learned in the learning that I had to do for myself around this, that whole ideology is around changing your amygdala's reaction, right? Like it is telling you to slow down so you can stop your amygdala from making snap decisions for you. It is telling you to expand who you know so that your amygdala is not afraid of people just because of who they are and how they look. But that definitely was like a learning journey for me, because I was like, this doesn't sound like a real answer, but it is.
But it is. The answer is stop and think for a minute, even for 20 seconds. Just stop before making a decision about something or saying something that you just don't, maybe you approach differently if you just paused.
Yep. Yeah. About everything. Whether you're looking at a
everything.
resume or, deciding which coffee shop to go to.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point about society fearing Black men, and I'm married to a Black man, and he's tall too. He's 6'3", and he is always concerned about how people perceive him and being scary to other people. And it's interesting, Theresa, because when we talk about situational privilege, I don't think about scaring people, but he is constantly thinking about it. Like his place, his positioning, what he's wearing when he's walking, approaching a neighbor's door. Like he's always considering it and mentions it a lot. It's something that's constantly running through how he moves through this world.
Yep.
And imagine having me aware of that.
To live with that like heightened awareness. Mm-hmm. That's the trauma. Like we have to live, your husband as a Black man has to constantly live with this heightened awareness of like how somebody else is going to perceive him. And it makes him like do all of these things so he can be perceived as a human.
You've spoken about, and we've touched on too in this conversation, like internalized oppression. It's like there are these ideas about oppressed communities and society, but then we'll take those and we'll internalize us. So it's the systems aren't just policing us externally. We end up policing ourselves. How have you seen that show up most commonly for Black women in particular?
We could talk about my hair right now. We could talk about the weave that I'm wearing. This white centric hair that I wear. I remember wearing an afro to court, and my visceral response to the reactions that I had as a result of the way that my hair looked that day. Like it's not even something I feel like dealing with. I'm just having that, like I already have all of these layers of things that I have to prove when I go into the courtroom, when somebody's telling me to sit next to my son, who's the defendant, because I'm a Black woman. Like I don't want to have to deal with something that I don't have to, I can control this hair. But, it shows up in lots of ways where we are elevating things that are Eurocentric as Black women. One of the things that I always talk about that I faced when I was a young person was, and I had to be really young. I was probably like 7. And people used to be like, oh, you're such a cute little Black girl. You're such a cute little dark skinned baby. And I was like, well, why does my cuteness have to be
qualified?
Right. Why are we qualifying my cuteness? Why can't I just be cute? And the skin complexion issue in our community is real. And it is one of the things that I have had to think about for myself as a Black woman who is dark skinned coming up in a community, and think about how it impacts my career, think about how it impacts my relationships. But all of it is like, how much closer can you get to Eurocentric, because then you're better.
After all the work that you've done in your career, what is your perspective on reforming a system from within versus from outside of it?
This probably goes back to my father. I'm probably not an abolitionist. Do I think that systems need to be abolished? Yes. But I know that that is not where my strength lies. So what I think that my responsibility is to fix the systems from within while I support the people who are building new systems, because I don't want the systems as they exist right now to stay the way that they are. And abolition work takes a long time. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of policy, connections, building, money. And I don't think that you have to be either or. I refuse to have a scarcity mindset that says that I can't work to make what's better that exists now better for my people. while also working to make a better system for my people that doesn't exist. So both ends is my answer.
Yes, I understand that. And it's like when I was younger, my naive self, I used to think that the only way to reform it is from outside of it. But I've realized now in understanding just this is the matrix. It's deep, it's complex, it's interwoven, it's intentional, it's self-sustaining. When you truly see it for what it is, it needs all of us fighting from all different angles, from in it, out of it. Like it needs all of it. So there's not one way to dismantle it. We can play a different role in it. It's all needed. What are you hopeful for or not for the future?
What am I hopeful for?
Where the world is now, I struggle with hope. And I think a lot of people, especially Black women at this point in time, struggle with hope. And I'm curious if you still have it and how you hold on to it.
Yes, I do still have it. And I think what makes me still have it is my restorative justice community, really. Like I do race work inside of restorative spaces. So I get to see the light bulbs turn on for people. And even if, and I usually do it for educators, which is important to me because they're the ones teaching our kids. When a light bulb comes on for somebody, I feel like it has so much enormous potential for ripple effects. What's happening at the top is horrible. And I don't know oftentimes what to do to push back at that. But what I tell my daughter, who is a theater kid and singer, is like, you have to do the thing that you do to help push back. So whatever the thing is that you do, for me, it's teaching people about inequity. I do that and I'm pushing back at the system. She's a singer. She does music that's social justice music because that's the way that she gets to push back. So this podcast is the way that you get to push back.
This is the way I push back.
So whatever it is that like somebody has the capacity to control, what is in your realm of control? Use that to push back. And if we're all doing that, then the systems will eventually or change because the systems this is the other thing that makes me hopeful. The systems are made up of people who are made by people who have always changed their minds. Like if we think about the way that our country began, and I'm just going to move past all of the bad things and get to the First Continental Congress. First Continental Congress. There was a bunch of elderly white men running our country. So how do we get from our First Continental Congress that looks like all the elderly white men to the diversity that is in our Congress now? Those white men, somebody in there had to change their mind. Somebody in there had to have an aha moment and do something about it. And as long as we keep focused on those aha moments that we can give to people, eventually the system goes from what it was to what it should be or what it can be. And I know that they're trying to bring us backwards, but I feel like there's enough people and it takes us all, like white people, Black people, all of the people to push back against it.
How can the Black Girl Ambition audience support your work, Theresa? And where can we find you on socials too?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm not really on any other socials, but find me on LinkedIn. Also go to my website. It's the RMS because it's Restoring Mindful Systems Chrysalis Project. Chrysalis because I love butterflies, or you can go to racemattersolutions.com.
Okay. So rmschrysalis.project.com or Race Matters Solutions.
Yes, rms.org. Feel free to write a comment about this blog. Feel free to look at my work. Definitely watch my TED Talk. Please watch my TED Talk, watch it and share. And if you're interested in having me speak to your community, I'm happy to come in and speak. It's what I do.
Awesome. My last and final question for you, which I ask all of my guests on this platform, is, Theresa, what is your greatest ambition?
In my desire to be a judge that we talked about at the beginning, I had an interview with this Black woman who could help me get to that goal. And the question she asked was, what do you want your legacy to be? And that question like spoke to me so much, because the legacy I want to have is just to be a good ancestor. Whatever that means. Like, I don't want to ever not show up. So I want my great grands to look back in 50 years to be able to say that you did something that made a difference for people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to be a good ancestor is my answer.
Yeah. My great auntie, my great great grandmother, Theresa, she's a great ancestor. I've never heard that before, and that's lovely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Theresa.
Thank you for having me. Great conversation.
Thank you. That is a wrap. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and join me again next week for another great conversation with a special guest. And remember, your ambition is your superpower. Keep dreaming big, building out loud, and living fully. Until next time, stay ambitious.
Overzealous when I'm thinking about the cash flow. I never had no handouts, just came natural. I've been testing so much, all these wrestlers nice.